I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, which is Kathy Oliver, Chair and founding co-director of the International Brain Tumor Alliance. IBTA is a global network established in 2005 as a dynamic worldwide community for brain tumor patient organizations and others involved in neuro-oncology. On behalf of IBTA, Kathy campaigns for equitable access to brain tumor therapies, encourages the establishment of brain tumor patient caregiver support groups in countries where they don't yet exist, and raises awareness of the challenges of this devastating disease. She is involved in cancer patient rights-based advocacy and is co-author of the European Cancer Patients Bill of Rights 2014 and the Brain Tumor Patients Charter of Rights launched in July 2020. Today, Kathy will be discussing the art of brain tumor advocacy. And I'll give it to you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you very much, Komal. I hope you can all hear me. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, and I see you've loaded my slides, so thank you very much. I just want to express my sincere gratitude to PASNO and the Brain Tumor Foundation of Pakistan for inviting me here today. It's a real honor. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I have no conflicts of interest regarding this presentation. Next slide, please, Komal. So this is my family. On a January night in 2004, my then 24-year-old son, Colin, who is pictured here in the kilt, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He was an otherwise very healthy young man, as you can see from the photograph. He was a rugby player and a keen bicyclist. He took the news of his brain tumor diagnosis with the optimism that youth often has. But for my husband, pictured here, our daughter, Miranda, pictured here, and me, the diagnosis was absolutely brutal, and it pierced forever, really, our carefree family lives. And I remember really clearly that when Colin went off for a blood test that night before surgery, because he needed an emergency debulking, I turned to the neurosurgeon and I said, "You will get every single bit of that tumor out, won't you, no matter what?" And the neurosurgeon turned to me. He peered over the top of his glasses and he said, "Mrs. Oliver, I will of course do my best to get as much of the tumor out of your son's brain as I can. But we need to think of his quality of life after the surgery. I don't want to rob him of his speech or cognitive or physical abilities by being too aggressive and damaging healthy brain tissue. What quality of life would he have then?" Indeed, the plea that I made to the neurosurgeon that night, get all of the tumor out, no matter what, was actually quite stupid, thoughtless, and selfish. But in my fear and desperation as a mother and wanting my son to live as long as possible, I hadn't considered that crucial factor, quality of life. I had only thought of quantity of life. Next slide, please. Now, next slide, please. Now, the author Viktor Frankl wrote, "We cannot, after all, judge a biography by its length, by the number of pages in it. We must judge by the richness of the contents." Next slide, please. We all know that people with brain tumors and their caregivers face significant challenges to achieve that richness of the contents. Next. Even in highly developed nations, patients come up against inequities in accessing therapies, patchy and uneven support services, and not enough clinical trials. Next slide, please. There may also be loss of employment and economic toxicity, a lack of information about the disease, a loss of control of one's life, and a loss of oneself. There is also a lack of rehabilitation, and quality of life does drop. And of course, we all know that there is still stigma attached to a brain tumor diagnosis. Next slide, please. And of course, under all of these daunting circumstances, it's always very hard to sustain hope, but we must all sustain hope at all costs. Next slide, please. Now, our vision at the IBTA is a world free from the fear of brain tumors, and our mission is to advocate for the best treatments, information, support, and quality of life for brain tumor patients, offering them, their families, and their caregivers hope wherever they live in the world. Next slide, please. We try to build bridges between all of the different stakeholders on the brain tumor journey, whether they're patients or families, healthcare professionals, members of industry, academia, policymakers, regulators, and others. And we also work with many different charities, not-for-profits, and foundations, large and small, in the international brain tumor community. In this way, we feel we can have a 360-degree understanding of everyone's perspectives, challenges, and goals. Now, we've been building bridges like this since the IBTA was established 16 years ago. And personally, there are two big lessons I've learned in this time about brain tumor patient advocacy. Next slide, please, Kamal. First, in order to deliver truly patient-centric clinical research and care, we should always go back to patients and caregivers and ask them to tell us what matters most to them. Because understanding the patient perspective is a powerful tool that we can all use to improve outcomes for patients and their families. Next. Second, I've learned that there is huge energy and power when a group of people or organizations with similar concerns come together and work towards the same goals. American Senator Ted Kennedy, who was diagnosed with a glioblastoma in 2008, said, "What divides us pales in comparison to what unites us." And what unites us here today and beyond this virtual conference of PASNO are the huge challenges we see, and many of which we experience on the brain tumor journey. So let me now give you some quick examples of how patient advocacy organizations have worked together to improve the quality of life for brain tumor patients and their families. As I said, we know that in our brain tumor community, there are inequities in accessing optimal treatment and support. And to be honest, this doesn't only happen in developing countries. Even in the most advanced countries on this planet, brain tumor patients can still be lost in a maze of uneven care and support. Next slide, please, Kamal. Now, to try and address some of these inequities and improve quality of life, 10 years ago, the IBTA published a pocket-sized card called the Brain Tumor Patients Charter of Rights, and you can see the original one here. But a few years ago, we felt that this very brief charter needed refreshing and expanding to better reflect changing medical practices and patient perspectives. So in 2016, a new charter drafting group was formed to update the old charter. Next slide, please. At the IBTA World Summit of Brain Tumor Patient Advocates in London in 2017, we had 85 delegates from around the world, and we held a charter workshop for summit participants whose organizations represent literally thousands of brain tumor patients and their families. Next slide, please. From that meeting, we developed the new current version of the Brain Tumor Patients Charter of Rights, which was launched, as Kamal said, recently in last year. Now, to date, over 90 patient organizations and professional medical societies worldwide have confirmed their support of the Charter, and you can see all of their logos there, including your logos of the Brain Tumor Foundation of Pakistan. We know that many countries lack basic health research and manufacturing facilities, and I'd like to go on to the next slide, please, Kamal. So the new charter addresses a series of rights that are linked to the various stages of the brain tumor journey, from diagnosis to end of life. And the charter also reflects input from a very wide variety of cultures and beliefs. We know, as I said, that not all countries have the capacity to deliver the most modern, scientific, evidence-based care for brain tumor patients. For some countries, therefore, the charter represents an aspirational ideal, which we can all work towards. Quality healthcare relies, of course, on money being available to pay for treatments, equipment, and a well-trained workforce. So we consider that the charter provides a policy tool for patient advocates and healthcare professionals to use when they engage with governments to highlight gaps in care and support, and to improve quality standards, healthcare policies, and practices. The charter can also be used by individual patients and caregivers to underpin the things that matter most to us on our brain tumor journeys. Next slide, please. The charter is now available in English and 12 other languages, and thanks to wonderful help from Komal of the Brain Tumor Foundation of Pakistan and her colleague Sufia Zamir, we will very soon be publishing the charter in Urdu as well. Next slide, please. Now, patient advocacy plays a crucial role in another project in which we're involved in Europe, the European Reference Networks, or ERNs for short. These ERNs were created in 2017, and they are collaborative virtual networks of specialists in centers of expertise around Europe who have come together to provide second opinions and expert treatments for people with rare diseases. Brain tumors are a rare cancer, so there is a European reference network for them as well, which is within a larger network for rare adult solid tumors called EuroCan. The role of patient advocates here is key in supporting the European Reference Network's mission to improve standards of care and also clinical research for people who live with a rare complex disease like a brain tumor. Patient advocates work in EuroCan at a very high level indeed, for example, sitting on the EuroCan steering committee, co-authoring clinical practice guidelines, and helping to establish a EuroCan registry for rare cancers. The work of EuroCan can also help improve healthcare policy by identifying gaps in the provision of healthcare services across different countries in Europe. The exchange of knowledge and information within and between EuroCan's 12 groups of all the different rare cancers also serves to highlight potential tools to improve healthcare policies in the future. Personally, I've learned an awful lot working with patient advocates in EuroCan from the fields of sarcoma, myeloma, kidney cancer, head and neck cancer, thyroid cancer, and other rare adult cancers, because we share a number of the same important issues. And as cancer treatments focus more and more on a tumor's biomarkers rather than on the specific part of the body where that cancer started, we're beginning to share some of the same targeted treatments as well. Next slide, please. Now we move on to Sub-Saharan Africa for a third example of the power of collaborative patient advocacy. In 2017 in London, the IBTA gathered together representatives of patient advocacy foundations in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Cameroon, and South Africa, along with the Society for Neuro-Oncology, SNO, that many of you know, and a range of African neurosurgeons and other healthcare professionals. Next, please. Our goals were to start building the foundations for a Sub-Saharan Africa multi-stakeholder neuro-oncology society, to actively involve the Sub-Saharan patient advocacy community in the work of this new society, and to organize a neuro-oncology conference in Sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. It became very apparent very quickly at the 2017 meeting that the African challenges we heard about were really monumental, and the resources to tackle them were few. Patient advocacy organizations at that meeting also shared very moving testimonies, which laid bare the everyday enormous struggles for people in that part of the world in terms of quality of life and access to treatments. Next, please. Now, I'm very proud to say that our initial objectives at that 2017 gathering were met in the space of just a few years. The Society for Neuro-Oncology, Sub-Saharan Africa, otherwise known as SNOSA, was established in 2018, and since then there have been face-to-face international conferences in Abuja, Nigeria, and Cape Town, South Africa. In 2020 and 2021, SNOSA, of course, held virtual conferences because of COVID-19. But the patient voice has been an integral part of these conferences and also SNOSA's work. 2 brain tumor patient advocates sit on the SNOSA board, the executive team, and the testimonies from the patient advocacy organizations at our initial meeting in 2017 helped build the foundation for the SNOSA of today. And I share with you the overwhelming message of the SNOSA project, which has been that working together collaboratively and with one voice, barriers can be broken down, the impossible can become the possible, and dreams can turn into realities for the African brain tumor community. Next slide, please, Komal. My last example of the power of patient advocacy is from Canada, where Kamal is. In 2011, the Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada conducted a study to determine the feasibility of creating a Canadian brain tumor registry. Because for a long time, the only brain tumor demographic research available to Canadian healthcare professionals came from the US. In May 2019, the Brain Tumor Registry of Canada was officially launched. And an important feature of this registry is that it contains data on both malignant and non-malignant brain tumors. Not all registries contain information on non-malignant tumors. The broad scope and the detailed data in the Canadian Brain Tumor Registry will significantly impact possibilities in securing funding for research and also better treatments, and therefore hopefully lead to better outcomes and better quality of life for people with brain tumors. The Canadian registry was kickstarted by patient advocates, putting up their hands and loudly saying, "I matter, please count my brain tumor." Next slide, Kamal. Finally, I think everyone will agree that at some point in all of our lives, we all may stumble for whatever reason. But for those whose lives have been touched by a brain tumor, it's a devastating tumble, not a stumble, a tumble into what is often a very confusing maze of the new normal, hospital visits, side effects, MRIs, medical language that patients don't understand, and worst of all, in many cases, a very uncertain future. Next slide, please, Kamal. So, in conclusion, we must all work together, building bridges, as I said, collaborations and innovative approaches to living with a brain tumor, so no one ever feels alone or forgotten. We must keep our efforts focused, we must keep our reserve firm, and we must keep our hopes high. Next slide. So thank you all very much for your attention and for inviting me to join you here today. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Kathy. This was very insightful, and we've been part of quite a few of your activities, and they're extremely, extremely helpful for new organizations like ours. Appreciate it.